I think we have to go back in history to have a sense of why do we use that term neuroaffective. Because if you go back to the 60s and 70s, the 1960s and 70s, there was no such thing as research in emotions. It just did not exist. It came out of this black box theory that the mind was a black box. So what you could see was behavior, and then you could also investigate cognitive processes. So every bit of research that was in the university back in the 70s was on cognitive dynamics. But this wasn't the case in the United States. So in Europe and in large parts of the US, we had neurocognitive processes. So that was called neurocognitive science and or cognitive neuroscience, whichever of those you prefer. And that was, of course, all about thinking and decisions and stuff like that. And then there were a few brave people. Perhaps the best known of those is Jaak Panksepp, and he started investigating emotional processes primarily in dogs and rats. And what he found was, for the time, a complete revolution. And he called his work affective neuroscience. And when we got into the game, which was when we started, Susan Hart, my dear colleague through 35 years now, and myself, I found Paul MacLean, and Paul MacLean had written this huge book about the triune brain and evolution. And the thing that blew me away at the time was that he started out with the concept of the first beginnings of the brain, which start in very primitive animals. You get the first neural networks. And then they are all about regulating the basic nervous system. So they're all about, hunger and fullness and satiety and stuff like that. But they're also about things like moving towards and moving away from. And they're also about being quiet or being active. All of those belong in our autonomic nervous system. And if you look at babies today, at children today, you can see that the first thing that develops is actually that level. So that babies are not born with a whole ton of different emotions. They're born with these very basic skills that have to do with moving towards, moving away from, high arousal, low arousal, comfort, discomfort. And even those can be lost depending on how the parents and other surroundings respond to them. So they learn, so they can lose these capacities, but they can also develop them. And at the next level, the limbic level is what Paul MacLean called it. At the next level, you get this enormous and incredibly complex unfolding of emotional skills. And what do emotional skills do? Well, they're a signaling system between us. Joy is a signaling system between us. I take my dog to the park, and she does play bows, and sometimes something goes wrong with another dog. They're both doing play bows, and then they're running and play fighting, and then something goes wrong, and what happens is that the first dog then does another play bow. It's reaffirming, it's a conversation, it's reaffirming that this is a game. It's not because I did something bad to you seriously. And actually, she takes that language understanding with her. So my husband was doing some exercises in the basement yesterday, and the dog was there, and he was doing one of these stretches, and the dog looked at him, and then she did a play bow and wanted to play with him. So there's this sense of, I understand that people don't talk my language, but this looks like something I know. So I think he wants to play. Okay.
I think
So
our kids are trying really hard to communicate with us.
yeah, they are. Yeah. So you get this whole unpacking of the emotional field in animals and in humans, but it only unpacks, it's a language. It unpacks through the way that we communicate with each other. So if we have a lot of smiling, if we have a lot of expressiveness in our faces, this is also where we get the expression capacity in our face. Snakes have very little facial expression, let me tell you, but dogs and human beings have a lot of facial expressions. So the facial expressions signal to others how we feel, and they do that largely without our knowing it.
Okay.
So you can see people when you're a psychotherapist, which I am, then you can see people having a feeling in their face, and they don't know yet what that feeling is. But if you wait a minute or two and ask them, then probably they will know by that time what that feeling is.
Yeah.
So that's the feeling unpacking of the brain development aspect. And that grows into the cognitive, or in a certain sense, into our whole um, um, inner map, which is a cognitive process. Mapping things is a cognitive process. And it grows into this mapping of the world and of ourselves so that we develop, I know what my identity is. I know who I am, probably not when I'm 3, but I know something about who I am when I'm 3. I know more about it when I'm 10. And I don't know anything about it when I'm 13, because that's what puberty does to us. And then when I'm 18, 19, 20, 21, 23, 28, 30, I start to know more and more about who I am. This is a cognitive process, and it develops out of these emotional processes.
Uh-huh.
So whole sequence is what we work with in the neuroaffective modality. And what Jaak Panksepp was studying was the emotional aspects of that. And we took his term for it, which was affective neuroscience, and said, well, if they call the understanding of decisions and thoughts, if they call that neurocognitive, we can call this neuroaffective.
Thank
So
you.
that's
Now that makes sense. Thank you very much. Yeah. Now, and I come to realize that also in my head, I always think of the brain as a cognitive part of our body, right? And
it's not.
it's mostly neuroaffective,
Yeah, it is.
I
It's mostly.
suppose.
It's true. It's basically neuroaffective. Even your cognitive parts are basically neuroaffective.
All right. And and how can we use this as an entrance to a better understanding or therapy or meditation?
Mhm. Well, I think that when I teach meditation or when I teach psychotherapy, I do both. Then what most people do is they start with the cognitive aspect. And when you do that, normally what you have, if you imagine that we have 3 blocks, okay, one on top of the other, on top of the third, then the lower block may be all about stress and, oh my God, I forgot this and I forgot that, and I should have polished my shoes yesterday or whatever. Or the lowest area doesn't think that, but the lowest area is in stress. It's not active in terms of being present. And the emotional level might be ruminating about, well, what's going on with my children, or what was that conflict with my husband about, or something like that. And then there's this control part on top that's saying, be still. And the rest of the brain is going, yeah, da, 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 And so people are immediately involved in a fight. Do we believe that any part of us will become more quiet if there's a sort of a sergeant major sitting up top saying, be quiet? No, we don't. I have tons of experience with working with people that have never meditated before. I've meditated once. And when I say, well, we're going to start with a bit of meditation today, they say, oh, I can't meditate. I tried it, and I can't stop my mind. And I'm like, well, I can't stop my mind either. I've been meditating for 30 years, so it's not a problem. So what we do is we start from the bottom. We start by stretching. We start with movement. We start with finding our autonomic nervous system and finding out what is happening in my body and what does it want to do. And as that happens, the foundation quiets. Believe it or not, when the foundation quiets, then the limbic system starts to go, okay, right. This is nice. The limbic system likes things that are pleasant. So it goes to pleasure, which is really an autonomic dynamic, but that goes to a sense of, this is enjoyable. I like this.
Mhm.
And that means that the emotional level is more quiet. And then we can go to uh, deciding where our attention is going, what our attention is doing. So basically, where most meditation and most psychotherapy starts from the top down. I want the story of your trauma, or let's control the brain, you know. I start from the bottom up. I start with the body, and then I go to the emotional level, and then I go to the mind.
Wow. So I had a really lousy night. We were taping this in the morning. I slept terrible and my mind was running around. And I noticed that when I was a little younger, I would worry about stuff, but now I was just looking for things to worry about. And I started thinking of Christmas, making Christmas cards, and I had some administration done and all kinds of wild ideas. But and a dozen times I asked myself, or I ordered myself to stop thinking, and then I also was in a loop, started rethinking the same thing over and over.
Mhm.
And then I thought, oh, maybe I should find connect with my body. And then I connected with my body, and I felt a huge unrest and like my life, my body was turning or something. And when I paid attention to that, it started to becoming less and quieter. And then finally, I fell asleep.
Thank you. You just did that was a very nice example of a neuroaffective intervention.
I thought, should I bring this up in this interview because I believe in serendipity, and well, here it is.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
So that's how it works.
That's how it works.
I also read in your book that meditation can be a lot of times can be something outside the body, right? A sacral thing or a cognitive thing or an extra
Yeah.
body thing. And you mentioned, or and that's what you're saying right now, that it should be or it can be to start within the body.
Yeah, well, it starts in your perception, in your perceptive system. And your perceptive system is generally a large part of it. If we look at the brain, it has a very large part actually, that's extra large in human beings even, that is all about organizing, that there are somatic sensations inside of us, and there are also perceptions from outside of us. And they lie in lines. So the innermost part is our inner perception, and the outermost part is the rest of the world. And then there's about a third of the slice. If you think of a layer cake, there are three slices. The middle layer is all about being able to either allocate outwards or allocate inwards. And usually what I do is I start by getting a sense of ourselves inwards, and then I start working with a sense of how do we feel the world inside of us? For instance, right now there's this thing called grounding, which people have been working with in trauma therapy and also in all kinds of other therapy all the time. And generally we do that by, you know, feeling our feet on the ground and feeling our butt on the chair and uh, and feeling how heavy we are and all that. And that's in a way fine, except it's also very will oriented. But we can also go to it with curiosity. Curiosity belongs to the autonomic nervous system. And if we start there, I can ask you to try just very, very slightly, just if I'm putting my hand here so you can see it, if you lift your hand about this much from the table. So yeah, so if you do that, just that tiny little bit, and then you put it on the table again so people won't be able to see it, but you'll be able to experience it, and you lift a finger or you start to lift your fingers, then you can feel something in them. You can feel their weight actually. But how do you feel their weight? How do you do that? Yeah, don't think about it. Keep feeling it. Yeah, I saw you do that. So you're feeling the weight of them. There it is. And that's inside. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then slowly put your hand down again on the table or on your lap for that matter. And just feel how it, in a way, settles. There you are. And then there's a relaxation with that.
Yeah.
And you go, yeah. And if you go into your arm and you just feel inside the arm, there's this, in a way, this fascinating thing that you can feel this this thing that you're not doing it. The earth is doing it. Grounding is not something we're doing. Grounding is something the earth is doing. The
Wow.
planet is doing it. Yeah. And that's where the world comes in. You start to sense the world because you can sense the world inside of you. And when you sense the world, You discover something. You discover that you're not a tiny little atom that's floating around in this planet. You're constantly held. You're in this embrace from the planet.
Yeah.
And that's the first part of feeling a sense of connection, and also a sense of in a way, attachment to being part of the world. Yeah. Instead of in the world, you are the world.
Yeah, but in my practice, I have a lot of people who are having a fight with gravity, and you're saying this is our ally, our friend, our
Absolutely.
connection.
Absolutely.
Grounding is not in our body; it's our connection with the world.
Yes, it
Yeah.
is. It's a
Wow.
connection from the world, actually,
Yeah.
and
From the world.
endless, endless and non-judgmental connection from the planet.
Many questions. So, is neuroaffective also about proprioception or interoception? Both, probably.
Yeah, both.
Yeah. All right. All right. So, mm, and we also, or in your opinion, do we also store emotions or traumas or things inside our body?
I think store is a complex word for this. What we do is we learn. We learn. We learn beautiful things, and we also learn painful things. And trauma has a kind of instantaneous learning because it's so dangerous that evolution has decided that when this happens, we need to always, it needs to always be very close to our perception, all right? And one of the ways that that has happened is that there's a part of us, the hippocampus, which is deep in the limbic system, so deep in the emotional system. And this hippocampus part of us actually has to do with memory. It has to do with remembering things, but it has a pal, and the pal is the amygdala. And the amygdala is all about emotional charge and things with great meaning, great importance. So you have these two. One is about memory, and it's not emotional. It's about when did something happen. So if something happened when we were 3 years old, that was terrible. We fell down the stairs and we broke our arm, right? So what happens? Well, the amygdala will go into high activity. So there's an enormous meaning to this. And if this trauma was strong enough, then maybe it was our brother pushed us down the stairs, right? So the hippocampus is hypersensitive to cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone.
Yeah.
So when there's too much charge, the hippocampus shuts down. What does that mean? It means that in later years, when the amygdala, in a way, sees a staircase, all this activity activates, and it's terrified of going downstairs or upstairs, particularly, of course, when we get older. And when that happens, the hippocampus wasn't involved in the original process. So it doesn't feel like something that happened when I was 3 years old. It feels like it's happening now. And that's the basis of trauma. That's the foundation of traumatic experience,
Yeah.
is that you get these traumatic memories, but they're not hooked into time. So you can say that the body stores them. You can also say that the amygdala, which is basically fast and sloppy, it's all about catching danger before danger happens.
Yeah.
But that also means that it looks like it might be dangerous, the amygdala goes like, oh my goodness. And if the hippocampus is not online right away, sometimes it is. It's like, that's not a snake, that's the garden hose, that's not dangerous. So, but if the hippocampus is not online, then it seems very, very dangerous. And if people have a lot of trauma, many people have a lot of trauma. Many people have war trauma. Many people have sexual abuse trauma that's gone on for years. Many people have just traumatic events that have happened because once they have happened, there's a tendency that they happen again more easily because we more easily go into that state, which is
Mhm.
a dangerous state to be in because we're not relating to our actual world around us. We're relating to the world that was, and we're going into states that are not helpful. We can't move aside from a car coming towards us if we're in our inner sense, we've just fallen down the stairs and we broke our arm.
Yeah.
It's complex. So I would say the body doesn't exactly store trauma, but the body holds the memory or holds the experience of trauma and relates to that as if it's in the present.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I understand. Well, I'm asking this because yesterday I talked with a therapist about yeah, trauma is inside the body, and sometimes there's a movement that's not finished, and we help them to finish the movement.
Mm-hmm.
And then I asked, okay, well, where is it? Um, is it in the proprioception maybe, or is it in the brain? Where would it physically be? This.
Technically, it's in the autonomic nervous system. It's the autonomic nervous system and the parietal lobe, which is this part that allocates, sensing outwards and sensing inwards, and the three-layer cake, so where the middle layer can go outwards or inwards. So those two parts are in charge of creating defensive movements or movements that are either geared to getting us out of danger or geared to preventing danger, to fighting against danger. Those are the two primary movements, but we can also have other movements. Do you know the feeling of going over to your refrigerator and opening the refrigerator and going, what did I want in here? You know that one? Yeah.
Yeah, very well.
So that's the movement pattern. There's something in you that decided that, and there was a reason for it, but you left the reason by the table over there, and you just went over to the refrigerator. So that system also functions in trauma. So you have these in a way, this readiness to do something, and if that gets interrupted, which it does in trauma, then that movement potential is still locked as a desire to finish, to complete. So primarily it's a neurological thing, but the neurological thing, we think about the brain and we think the brain is in the head, but you could just as well say that the brain is in your whole body,
Yeah.
because every sensory cell that you have in your brain relates back into feelings and sensations and movement capacity and decision-making processes.
Yeah. And is there a special approach in healing this trauma from a neuroaffective point of view?
Well, first you have to find out what kind of trauma are we talking about. So the one about my brother pushing me down the stairs and me breaking my arm, for instance, that one is fairly simple. My brother probably didn't mean to kill me, right? So my brother was just pissed at me. He was 1 year older and he just pushed me down the stairs. He just pushed me, really, and I was standing next to the stairs. So that's a fairly simple trauma in itself. It's complex because there was a broken arm. But when you have a broken arm, as soon as you have breaks or you have physical damage or you have near-death experiences, that goes to a deeper level of trauma. So you have to work with in a way, the somatic impact of that. And when you go to that memory, you get the somatic response, which is often a trembling. It doesn't have to be, but it often is a trembling, which is the brain's way of resetting itself. It trembles its way out of the normal habit of either wanting to attack, but there's nothing here to attack, or wanting to run away, but there's nothing to run away from.
Yeah.
So that's one aspect. Another aspect involves the limbic system. Which means the emotional system is very strongly involved. Usually that happens because we have parents that are traumatizing us or family members that are traumatizing us. And when that happens, so you have a mother who's psychotic and who is mistreating you, or you have a father or a stepfather who's sexually abusing you, or who's sexually abusing your sister, and who says, if you say anything to anybody, then I'm going to kill your sister. So you're not going to do that, or you're going to be put in a children's home, and you don't want that either. So there are all these different ways that attachment dynamics can get involved into traumatic experiences. And we also have that as adults. We enter into an organization, or we're in an organization, and there are fights in this organization, and some people think that they should be in charge, and they think that somebody else is terrible, and everything they do is wrong. So this person sort of hangs on to their job, but they get screamed at every day for 10 years. This is traumatizing. If you have a relationship to this organization, this is a traumatizing experience, and can take a long time to unfold again, that you dare. And why is that? It's because it took a long time to develop it. So we have these long-term stressors as well as the individual traumatic events. And when you're working with the long-term stressors, you also have to work with the attachment dynamic between you and the client, because it's an attachment issue.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you also need to understand it. And why do you need to understand it? Well, there's this top part, the top part that thinks and makes decisions and stuff like that. But it also creates an image of the world and of me in the world. So this image of me in the world is also what will tell me what place do I have here. Do I have a right to speak? Can I be in a group without spacing out immediately, which is the more primitive part? So, but that has to be learned slowly, because the capacity, the sense of not being able to be in a group without being spaced out is also learned over a long time. So you have these two dynamics, the trauma dynamic and the attachment dynamic, working together.
All right. All right. Yeah. Um, I think in your book you also mentioned that the brain keeps developing, not just in your child years, but throughout your whole life, right?
Throughout your whole life.
And I wasn't aware of that. Just recently, my wife showed me that. I said to her, "It looks like female bodies keep changing during life, but men bodies don't." But I'm 50 years old now, and she said, "Well, I see guys from 50 years old are have like getting a different body, but they also keep changing their brain keeps developing until
Yeah.
you die, and there's certain uh, fields of development or something."
Yeah, normally it's part of the research on wisdom is actually what we're talking about.
Oh,
And if you look into different animals, it's been a big discussion in the evolutionary psychology field. And one of the things that you can see is that certain animals, like large whales, for instance, the females, you can see that they actually continue to live for a long time after after menopause, basically. And human women do that too. We live for a long time. So there's been all this wondering about what's the benefit of this. And what the theory is that the benefit is that we have a memory. We have this automatic knowledge. I have an automatic knowledge of how it was in the 1960s because I was alive, right? And if you were born in 1995, that's where your world starts. If you're born in 1955, you need to develop a memory first, but somewhere around, 6 or 7 or 8, you start to get a sense of the world around you and the way it's put together and stuff like that. So you have a memory of what's happening in the world. And that seems to be important. And for some people, it also develops into a capacity which is the same capacity that we find in meditation. And the capacity is to be able to feel something. It's not that your feelings go away, not in meditation either. So your feelings are there, but there's also a space to the feeling. There's a sense of a little bit of space to the feeling and a sense that this has happened before and it will probably happen again. So there's a sense of um, the repetition in the world, you might say, that gives you more space to look at aspects of what is going on and to approach them with kindness. So you are less easily traumatized, which is part of the trauma dynamic, by the way, that you're less easily traumatized when you're, say, in your 60s than you were when you were 2 years old. So you're less easily traumatized. You've seen a lot of things before, and you don't think about them as much. If we look at learning patterns for 25-year-olds, the learning pattern is that we start with knowing something. It's like a recipe in a cookbook, You start with this, and then you do that, 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 and then you end up with this. And if you're 65 years old, you do something completely different, which is actually in the thinking brain. You look at a situation, a context, and you kind of absorb the whole context as one thing, and you go, okay, this is the important thing to look at right now. So it's a completely different way of working, and that's how your brain works. And it works that way because it's weakened. In the 20s, you just need a very small part of your brain to do this step-by-step process. In your 60s, you need kind of your whole brain to do this looking at everything at once perspective. But I can say happily from the age of 68 that it seems as if it's still working just fine. So
Well, that's interesting what you mentioned about whales and humans. That so you would say like if we don't have any reproduction functions anymore, we're good to go. But in mankind, we need that extra time from the older women and maybe men too.
yeah,
And in that time, they are kinder. Maybe that's why uh, my parents or my mother treats my kids totally different than she treated me. But so we need that wisdom or that
yeah,
mildness for our new generations.
yes, that's right.
It's not personal, it's transpersonal, it's for our species.
That's right. That's for our species.
It's amazing.
Old people are for the species. That's right.
Yeah. For continuation and the other thing is maybe that's well for me that looks like a problem. If you get older, you get more conservative and more right wing. We seem to have a problem at that at this moment in Holland. Well,
Yeah,
let's not talk about politics, right?
yeah, it's complex. I think you don't hear much about the people that don't. They go the other way. But there are certainly some things that you look at differently. You look at issues, and you look at how that will work in terms of stability, as well as looking at it in terms of how it will work in terms of justice. Justice is much more a young person's burning issue,
Yeah,
and stability is more of an old person's burning issue. And if you look at them, it's not like you just need one. It's not like we can do with stability with no justice. It's not like we can do with justice with no stability either. We need both. So
mm,
how do you get them to fit together?
mm,
I think also that, I mean, there's a saying in wisdom research, which is that wisdom comes with age, but sometimes age comes alone. And
mm,
and sometimes age does come alone. I remember an older woman who's long dead now. I guess she was about the age I am now, but she had been very beautiful when she was young, which I was not. She was very, very beautiful when she was young, and she had learned, all the different things you can do with your face and all your clothes and all.
mm.
And then suddenly there she was in her early 60s, and she wasn't beautiful anymore. And guys didn't look at her anymore.
No,
And she was completely depressed, and she had no idea. It was like she lost her identity.
yeah,
And that's what you don't want to do. So you enjoy, when you're young, enjoy the beauty of being young.
yeah,
I enjoy the beauty of the young people that I see, and this overflow of energy. Why walk somewhere if you can run, kind of thing. That I lost somewhere in my 50s. But we have something else. We have just the beauty of what the changing of the seasons looks like. We
yeah,
have the sense of being able to look at a room or look at a person and see what is the core item, what is the core issue that we need to address here for this to turn into something more wholesome. We have a sense of a greater stability in the world as well. The,
yeah,
the earth has been holding us for a very long time.
yeah. We know a thing or two about gravity, for instance. Well, I read a nice quote yesterday saying when we talk about trees, we talk about trees keep growing. And when we talk about people, they're getting old or older. And we should say people are growing.
People are
But
growing.
I can also understand your example of somebody who was very beautiful and that was her identity. And that's I can imagine that's difficult when that goes and you have to trans or move on,
Yeah,
uh, uh, reinvent yourself, maybe perhaps.
yeah.
So you were talking, I think, about the triune brain and that it develops from early childhood on. Is it so? I heard once a philosophy that as we get how to say when you get uh, when you
Older? No?
no when you get born, but before when you get sorry.
Conceived. When you're conceived. Conceived?
Conceived, yeah, conceived. You go through all the stages of evolution. So you start as a mineral, you become a fish, and then and then when I heard you say, then after you are out of the womb, do you continue in that you first develop your early brains and then your more
Yeah,
limbic systems?
yeah, yeah, that's right. I don't think you start as a mineral, but you start as a single cell organism,
Mhm.
and then you become a two cell organism, and that's when the Big Bang happens. That's when the explosion happens, and the triune brain does start developing as soon as you develop into three layers, and the inner layer is what turns into your brain, and interestingly also your skin.
Yeah,
So you have this process,
to learn.
and children actually start to learn. We know now, fairly, I think it's a fairly recent discovery, that babies and their mothers actually exchange cells. We used to think that they didn't, but they exchange cells. And since the egg that you are was developed in your mother, and your mother was developed in your grandmother, the egg actually has memory resonances from being inside your grandmother and living throughout the life of your mother until you're born. So there's this whole generational aspect that people sometimes show up with in psychotherapy, that they remember things that they never experienced. It's uh, fairly common that they experience traumatic events. They suddenly start popping up in their dreams or in the psychotherapy work that they're doing.
Yeah,
So yeah.
yeah, I
And
can
you
imagine.
continue developing, you do continue develop. First, the autonomic nervous system develops. When that's online, the limbic system starts to develop. It's basically the neuron connections, the lines, like telephone lines between different areas of the brain grow. And if they're not stimulated properly, in other words, if you have a mom who's on drugs, so you get born and nobody knows she's on drugs, but she is, and you get put over in a cot, and she's on drugs. She doesn't know you're there, and this will create a very deep disturbance in your system because there was nobody there to invite you into
Yeah,
contact, to be excited about your looking at them, to be happy when they see you, to do things like that. And since we are so deeply we're deeply enmeshed in a system in our brains called mirror neurons,
mm,
the way that we relate to other people is through what they do. So a large part of what I can do with you today is coming because the way that you are accepting it, inviting it, and resonating with me in it.
yeah, yeah. So, like learning a language, we need interaction to learn this. Yeah, totally makes sense.
Yeah.
And if we don't, yeah, if we, it's just like talking. If we have parents that have a very small knowledge
Look.
of
Yeah. Yeah.
vocabulary, thank you, then we learn a little, or we learn specific, or we learn aggressive ways of talking.
Yeah.
Right. So interesting. Hey, Marianne, and you also teach or give courses also in Holland every now and then. I saw.
Yes, I'm trying to remember. If you go out to Body Mind Opleidingen, they have my courses, and I have courses. I'll be doing one more in the neuroaffective training, and I'm doing one on shame and guilt actually in the spring. And then in next autumn, I think it is, I have another meditation workshop, and all of those have space for people. So
Ah,
there are space.
2024.
Yeah, yeah. 2024 has three trainings in the Netherlands, and also trainings in Germany and in Switzerland and in Austria and possibly in China.
Um, yeah, I'll put a link in the bio so people can look into it if they find it interesting. Um, yeah, I have 1,000 questions and they keep interfering with each other. So I'm going to turn it around. Is there something you want to address, or did we forget to mention something?
I think that maybe one thing that's worth addressing. I mean, often people are wondering, how did I start, a meditation trainings when I'm a psychotherapist? How did that happen?
Mm,
of course, it started happening in the early 90s when I was just interested in meditation for my own sake. Um, but then I think one of the things I realized through doing trauma therapy with Peter Levine, and Peter Levine developed this whole system called somatic experiencing that he has been working on ever since I met him, and a couple of decades before that too. And I think one of the things that he and I are working on right now is a book called Trauma and Spirituality, and the essence of that comes out of my maybe 40 years of working with people with all kinds of issues, and Peter's 50 or 60 years of working with people primarily that are traumatized. Um, and he's been in pretty much all the hot spots in the world. And one of the things that both of us realized was that there's this space inside of us that many people that are traumatized lose, and it cannot be hurt. I had a client say it to me recently. She has a terrible life history, and she said recently, I've never told anybody these stories before because I was afraid that they wouldn't recognize that there's something in me that cannot be hurt. And if they did recognize that, then they would think it wasn't so bad. But it was terrible, and there was also a part of her that cannot be hurt. And that dichotomy is what we want to write this book about. So that's, I think, a very essential piece to get out to people in Holland, where there's a lot of transgenerational trauma from World War II,
Mhm.
and also to people in many, many parts of the world where war has been ongoing, sometimes for centuries, that there is a part of us that cannot be hurt, and it can also help us to heal.
All right. And how do you link that with spirituality?
Well, it's the same thing that they say in spirituality. It's that we're looking for that part which cannot be hurt.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Yeah. Um, yeah. I read some things in your book also about spirituality and neuroaffective. Um, but I can't recall it anymore. So, is it okay if we go to my last and favorite question?
Yes, please.
What makes a good therapist?
What makes a good therapist? Um, the first thing that comes to mind is what Søren Kierkegaard said. He said that if you want to help someone else, you certainly have to know more than they do. But first of all, you have to know what they know. So the first part of being a good therapist is to be able to hear what the other person has to, not just to say, but also what the other person is not saying or cannot say,
Wow.
what they sense, what they feel. That's what it is to absorb another person into your world. And I think that welcome has to be there in a good therapist. And we do that in 1,000 different ways. And the next, I think, is to not be busy, not to be busy thinking, not to be busy with someone else, not to be busy with what's for dinner,
Oh yeah,
to be there.
be there. Yes. Well, thank you very much.